Hi everybody, this is Amy, and today I'm going to show you how to make my crepe paper roses. This is something that I've started making for friends, for gifts, and I am absolutely in love with the process of painting the petals instead of just using plain colored crepe paper. I think I can get a lot more definition to the petals and just to create something beautiful this way. So if you'd like to see how I make these, here we go. So first I want to talk about the supplies that I use. I use primarily alcohol ink diluted with just plain isopropyl alcohol. You can use some of the other products that Tim Holtz has for blending, but I just use alcohol. It suits my needs perfectly and it's very inexpensive. So you choose your colors. I'm not going to go over the colors that I use because there's so many, and just pick the ones that you enjoy and you will have lots of happy accidents, as I do almost every time I do this. So here I'm just going in with colors. I knew I wanted like a peachy orange color. I knew I wanted yellow, and as you'll see, this one gets pretty surprising because of the almost fluorescence of one of these colors, which I believe is flamingo. It could be watermelon. And we use colors from all different lines of alcohol ink. The girls have even made some the DIY way with just soaking some old markers in isopropyl alcohol overnight and get lots of surprising colors. So here I am just mixing up just kind of a general batch, and I do this on the fly. If I run out, I mix up some more and do it some more. So this is just kind of a free creative process that I'm going through right now. And I learn a lot when I do this. So there, everything's mixed up, and I'll set that aside. So now we're going to work on actually making the petals. And just a quick rundown with the crepe paper that I'm using. I love to use Leah Griffith extra fine crepe paper. I can make petals out of almost every lighter color. She does have a set that has 10 different rolls of colors, and I just kind of go for the light colors and dye those. There's the wrapper. You can get those on Amazon. It's very fine, it's very stretchy, and it just takes on a lifelike quality. These are what I use for my petals, my leaves, and my different parts of the flower, which I will show you shortly. That is doublet. You can get that in several different places. You can also get it from Leah Griffith, and they usually come in, it's 2 pieces of this single ply glued together. And so you get one color on one side and a different color on the other side. So here's just an example of the Leah Griffith extra fine. It's 20 inches wide, so I can make these 20-inch strips. And I do this with my rotary cutter and my rotary cutter ruler and cutting pad, and I just cut strips. So depending on if I mess up and cut one too thin, which sometimes I do, this is a very forgiving medium, so mistakes are normal and welcome, and actually I believe there's no mistakes in art, so just kind of go with the flow. Let's cut some petals. So I did get out my ruler so we could kind of get a frame of reference here about how wide these strips are. So again, they're 20 inches long, and this one is coming out at about 1 3/4 of an inch. So those are my wide strips. And so here I just pulled out a couple of my other ones that I had sliced up and gotten ready and measured those for you so you can just kind of get an idea. Those are 1.5 inches by 2.5. So for the most part, most of my little pieces are about 2.5 inches long. Now I'll look at the way the grain of the crepe paper is going. You're going to have the longer section is going to go with the grain. And it's kind of easy to figure that out when you start unrolling the rolls. So here I am cutting against the grain, and I'm just making little rectangles. I usually don't cut more than 3 strips at a time, 3 layers at a time, and I use very sharp scissors that my children have not gotten to, and cut wire with and all that fun stuff that ruins scissors. So here I've got my nice little stack, and for most of these flowers you need, I would say, no more than 40. When I start coloring, I just do a whole big batch at once. So here I am just kind of gathering up some of my little strips, and I like to cut multiples at the same time again, just to save time. And I'm just cutting a little narrow at the bottom, rounded at the top petal. I don't have a pattern for this, I just eyeball it. The tips are okay if they kind of come to a point right there, but it's okay if they don't, if they're rounded. You really just want a simple petal shape. It's going to get stretched, it's going to change. This is just the basis for the beginning of the petal. And when I first started doing this, I was dyeing the pieces while they were still rectangles. And I didn't like that because I was cutting off a lot of the interest that ends up settling at the very edges of the crepe paper. So I highly recommend you cutting your petals first so that the ink can do its fabulous edge drying when the petal has already been cut. You'll see what I mean as this goes along. So here I am doing 2 or 3 layers at a time. And if I miss a little on the edge and it ends up being straight, it is not the end of the world. This is very forgiving. Oh boy, I'm going to cut some more. And I will mention right here, when I first started doing this, I was all thumbs. I was not sure if I was going to be able to learn how to handle this. My fingernails were getting in the way. I felt like a klutz. I wanted so much for this to work because I'm so enamored by the work I see online. And it is a muscle memory thing. It does get better. So you will learn to manipulate it and stretch it. And it is truly wonderful. I'm now just so in love with this medium. So here I'm just laying it out on a piece of parchment paper. I can't say that I love using parchment paper. I do like using tinfoil better. It seems to dry faster. The parchment paper does absorb a little bit of the alcohol. It kind of penetrates, and I think it might even absorb a little more than, of course, the aluminum foil. It just lets it all soak into the paper, the crepe paper. So I just did it so it wouldn't be super reflective for you guys. Okay, so here I am. I'm going to go in with this fluorescent crazy color, and I mix up my petals like that. Sometimes I'll do pink and yellow or white and cream. It doesn't really matter. I like the variation, but this is extremely subtle between these two colors. It's just a nice base. And when you buy a pack of Leah Griffith, you get to use all the different colors and see what happens. They do have some very dark colors, like a mulberry and a dark red, which I may start using bleach on to try to get some variation. So I have plans for a video with that in the future, because bleach is another way you can do it. You can also use darker crepe paper to create these dyes and just use a water soak. which I've not tried yet, but crepe paper also has an incredible amount of dye in it that you can use as painting medium. So here I am, I'm just trying to settle down that fluorescent. It was a little bright for me. I wasn't quite sure how it would dry. I make a lot of gifts for my daughter's friends, my daughters, and so super fluorescent pink is actually a good thing. I was going for a little more natural, more subtle, but I can always find a recipient for any color, depending on their personality. So I like the duotone, so I'm usually going with a darker color. I don't know, whatever you feel like doing. Experiment and see what you can create. This is an inexpensive way to experiment, and you will end up using all these petals. Even if you do like a leftovers, which I've done with just all my leftovers, I'll grab everything I've made that I have extras and I'll just make a flower from it. It's kind of fun. You learn things. So here I'm just doing yellow at the bottom. You can make this as light or as dark as you want. You just add more alcohol and it will water it down. This one's pretty bold. And I'm just using up what I mixed. And I love using those little condiment cups. They're awesome. And very little goes to waste. If anything is left over in there, it just dries up and you can use it later. So it only takes about 30 minutes and you want it to be completely dry. So just make sure, depending on your humidity, that they are dry before you start doing this, or they could tear. Even though this is single ply, this is durable. It's surprisingly strong stuff. So here I am making the center tiny little crumpled up. Usually it's the part of the rose that never gets a chance to open, and so they just kind of stay wrinkled in the near the center. I'll show you an example of that. And I'm just picking whatever. I usually make about 9 of these, and that's usually enough to go around the center portion. So that's what I'm talking about right there, the little crinkled up parts. And I will unwrap those in a second. So I set those aside, and now it's time to curl. So gently, with the edge of your scissors and your thumb, just like we used to curl wrapping ribbon when we were kids, you just kind of go about halfway or a third of the way down the petal. Hold on tight, give it a little pressure. You'll know if you do it too hard because it will rip, and you'll end up twisting it down into another little center petal. There's always a use for them. So I'm just kind of doing it in 2 passes, sometimes 3, and just gentle pressure. Some scissors have very sharp edges right there where my thumb is. This pair of scissors has a very sharp edge and then a more dull edge, so I usually try to find the duller edge to do this work. It's very fast. It makes a great noise. Sorry, I strip out all the sound for my videos so I can just do my voiceover, but it's a very satisfying sound. So curl all those edges, and if it can take it, I'll kind of go down the side and make a little more of a point at the end like I did in that one. And the color is pretty color fast. I think what's on my fingers is from when I was painting. If you don't want to ruin your manicure, I would wear gloves. It does take some work to get it alcohol ink out of your cuticles, but my manicure usually has pieces of hot glue stuck to it, and it's just how my hands look when I'm doing this. And I do not use hot glue. I use the low temp mini. It's all you need. And when you dye these, they're pretty much consistent on both sides, so you don't really have to worry about curling one side or the other. And again, petals are varied, and I just love the variation on these. It looks like a rose taken apart from my grandmother's garden. And it gets little sunburns on the edges as it starts to open up, and it just reminds me of my grandma. So I might have made a few more twisties just because I had some leftover petals. Okay, so here we go. We're going to start curling. This is really satisfying. You are just going to put your thumbs about halfway down the petal, and you want the curl that you just made curling towards you. There's definitely two ways to do this. You can flip it around and curl it the other way, but for these roses, these curl up in this fashion and kind of round into themselves. And it's very satisfying. It's just gentle tug. I can do it all in one pull, and you'll see that top part curl in even more towards you. That's exactly what we want. I don't stretch the bottom part. I leave it alone. There's plenty of material to work with, to glue, to scrunch, as we will kind of get into that in a little bit. You can create a pleat just by pressing your thumbs. There's not a lot of fancy gluing involved in these. I've made some that require multiple steps of gluing and pleating before you even glue the petal to the flower stem, but this one is easy and fun and not too many steps. There, looks like I just tore apart a rose. Here they are. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the other parts. This is when we use, of course, sharp scissors. I take apart a lot of silk flowers. I do silk flowers for weddings, and I always trim off long stems, and I use them. I think it's better if it's not some thin piece of 16 gauge wire. So I found these at Hobby Lobby, and they're just the perfect size for what I'm doing, but they run out, of course, because it's Easter. You can also make it with tin foil. You can form it to exactly the shape you want. It does not matter. It's totally going to be covered. You can also use a pom-pom and just glue it on there, on the end of the stem. So here's some pieces of, that's single ply green. That's what we're going to use to cover the stem. Notice I have all the green lined up. This is to cover that little glitter Easter egg, the center. And these are all made out of doublet. So these are the thicker ones. That one's for the leaf. This one is for the center stamen. We're going to make that out of that piece. You can make it a little longer if you want, and just make more. And then the bottom part is for the green bud cover that goes on the underside of the flower, which you will see. So we're going to start with the part that covers the little center of the bud, the little Easter egg. Okay, and then here's my wire, which is probably a 16 gauge green fabric wrapped wire that I use to make the leaf. Okay, sorry if that went a little fast. You'll see as we go along what I mean here. I'm just now gluing the little egg shape onto the nice, it's a wire bendable stem. This is just a different one I made. I just took a lighter piece of single ply, and I just literally right out of the container of alcohol ink, I just painted stripes on it and let it dry. And it just created a little more variegation. I just felt like making it a little more exciting than plain green. And I'm sorry I'm out of camera right here, but you just kind of fidget until that twist covers the whole ball, whether it's the Easter egg or the tinfoil wrap or the pom-pom. You just kind of spread out that twist until it covers. So it's a single twist, and then you wrap it around. So it kind of looks like a little bud. And And I am trying to decide what centerpiece to use. Again, it's not exactly the same as the picture previously where I laid them all out, but it's just some stuff that I made and touched pure alcohol ink to the edges after I kind of saturated it in alcohol, and it kind of bled down the veins of the crepe paper quite nicely. So I like that very much. So I'm just folding it over so I don't have to trim, make so many snips in this. So I cut the edges so I have nice uniform snips. Of course, I am not snipping all the way through. I'm stopping within about a ½ inch from the edge of this strip. And I'm just nipping and making tiny little 1/8 inch or smaller snips. When you open it all up, you have this lovely ruffle. And then I'm just taking my fingers and twisting all these little fringe pieces that I've made. And creating just a curl. I'm going in different directions, just kind of scrunching till I'm satisfied, and I'm just making all these little stems that will make up the center portion of the flower. And again, this is very satisfying. And this stuff is tough. This is, actually I think this is just plain old cheap. I picked it up at Michael's. It comes in 12 by 12 sheets, and it's just their really inexpensive crepe paper. And it's not the best for making flowers, but it's definitely awesome for making these foundational pieces. All of this takes dye very well. And I am working through a lot of technical stuff with my camera. I'm sorry this is a little out of focus. I'm working on making it all in focus. And there I just determined that I'd gone around enough, so I ripped off my excess and saved it for something else. So we're just a little, maybe a ½ inch past the top of the bud, letting it stick up and just look natural. And now I'm going to unwrap partially these little center crinkles. And I love how they curl inward and outward kind of unexpectedly. And it's just, each one is like a cute little surprise. Okay, so here, just to keep this one I am going to do a little pre-work on it before I glue it to the flower center. I'm just folding it in half kind of randomly, not even in half, maybe a third of it gets folded over. Just to keep that folded shape, kind of opening. And again, this is why I love working with a low temp. I've burned myself so many times with my high temp gun. His nickname is actually Bernie. He's brutal. But again, when I'm doing those big floral arrangements, you've got to make sure they stick. So here I am, I'm just kind of randomly pairing them together now. The ones that I've made and folded over, I'm just kind of overlapping maybe halfway, 2 of them together, just like that, just to create some pieces that I will use when I start gluing. This is probably the most prep work I do, is just for these little interior pieces. And it's worth it. Oh, focus. Okay. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sets. So boy, I twisted 12. But I'll use it. So this one, you want this to be again about a half an inch or about a half an inch above the tips of the green center. So again, it's just layering up, and that's more than a half an inch. So just visually what's appealing, what's a good proportion. Each flower is a little different, but that's just kind of what I go for. And I always work with, usually with the stem in one hand. Now I'm switching up, but yeah, I'm doing it a little different here. But you will develop a rhythm and an organization that makes it actually pretty easy. I hardly ever put it down. I'll put the glue gun down, but the stem usually stays in my hand. So that gives you an idea of pretty much the proportion. So bud, then the little stamens, and then these little crinkled parts. Now I'm going to start building with the open petals, and they are going to roll towards the center. So I'm putting glue on the base and applying it just anywhere on the exterior circle. And here I am starting to overlap by about half, maybe a little less than half as my overlap for these petals. And I am just, the height of this row is just above the crinkles. So I'm just kind of creating this little cup or bowl that is holding them. They're just a little bit longer than the crinkles. I would say 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. So here I've met up with my first petal, gone around, what is that, 6 or 7 petals, just until you match up again with your first one, you overlap it. Okay, then I'm working with my camera, and I moved into a studio with a white background, so I hope this is a little bit easier for you to see. I'm going to continue. So this row is now just a little bit lower than the cupping round, and I am overlapping alternatively. So the center of this petal is right in line with where the other two overlapped. So I don't want to match my petals up as I go around. I want them to alternate. And I'm giving these a little bit of a pinch with my thumbs at the base where I'm applying the glue, and I'm kind of creating a little pleat. When I create a pleat, it causes that petal to cup out even more, and it requires no pre-gluing. I'm just pinching with my thumb, and there's a spot in here where you can see it begin to pleat. And it really opens up the flower when you cause this, we'll call it the third level, the third layer. You can really open up the flower, and you notice how I'm dropping down a little bit more with each row. This row is almost done. And you will know because you'll meet up with the first in that row. And there I am alternating. The center of my petal is going in between the junction of the other two. Okay, so that row, I'm just continuing, dropping down a little bit each time and checking so that it looks even. And there I did a pleat. I just shoved my thumbs together and caused that to just kind of pucker between my thumbs. And as you can see, the variation in these colors just really adds a lot to this flower. There's a lot of really pleasant surprises in here. Okay, so here's my last layer. This is when I turn the petal upside down. It's still been pulled and rounded the same way as the others. And I go in, and the tip of this one where I'm putting the glue is almost touching the stem. So I've made my way around, and I'm closing it up basically by pushing those, the very base of that petal right up against the stem. And these give it the impression that it's opened, that it's a very mature rose. It probably only has a day left if it were on the bush. And this is when I loved to find them. They're the most fragrant. I miss my rose garden. I've had many rose plants in my life, and this is something that I really love being able to recreate. So as long as it looks good to me and it looks uniform, I think this one is done. So in total, there's only 5 layers of petals. There's a center crinkle, the cup layer, and 2 that are opening out and moving downward, and then the final layer of it rolling under. Okay, so now I'm going to make the leaves that are underneath. These are the leaves that covered the bud and are now folded backwards underneath the flower. So against the grain, with the grain, I am cutting just little triangles out to create just a strip of trees. And then I'm going to twist them and distress the edges. Here I'm trying to figure out what color I want to have show. I usually go with the darker. It just is a little more dramatic. So then I'm twisting the edges of these about no more than a half an inch of the very tip. I'm just scrubbing them back and forth. You can be quite rough with this, and just making them kind of look like they're coming to a natural point. And then now I'm going to stretch gently, and just with the tip of my thumb, I'm grabbing and stretching 2 or 3 times just that very center part of that leaf, just to make it bow out a little bit. I'm not stretching the base of the strip. As you can see, it's bending outward. So with the color that I've chosen to show, I will start applying it. And I am going right up against the stem, covering what's left of the petals. And as you can see, I'm giving it a good little scrunch with my thumbs, my fingernails, as I am just setting that glue so that it creates kind of a rounded leaf edge. So that is where the gather happens. And I just kind of keep going around until it looks full. And I probably won't use all of these. I'm going to run out of space. Most of the time, those are odd numbers. Those little petals are odd numbers. This one ended up being even, but and there you go. So that's the underside. Okay, now we're going to do the leaf. And this is where I just pull apart gently the very edge. I'm creating a ruffle along the edge of this leaf. And notice the direction of the grain. So these are cut perpendicular so that you can create this ruffle. If you cut it the other way, you will not be able to ruffle it. And I love this paper coated florist wire. It just blends in nicely. And I just try to glue 1/2 at a time. Seems to work. And it does kind of end up looking like a vein for the leaf. And I give it a little bend so that it looks natural, sometimes even a twist. And then this part I just want kind of at a right angle so that I can glue it to the stem. Keep that part nice and straight. And I usually only do 1 leaf. You can do more if you want. I think 1 is enough. Usually there's a note attached to this, and that leaf just helps the note stay where it belongs. So this is against the grain. This is a long strip, and it stretches wonderfully. And I like using this instead of florist tape. Florist tape has wax in it that just remains sticky, and it can, for me, it's frustrating, and I would rather have them all the colors match. So I just use a strip of crepe paper to do this. And I cut that little triangle off so that I can get a nice edge up against the leaves. I do want to cover all that center material. You have to be careful with this. It is not very durable when it's stretched out like this. So it can tear, but it is very forgiving. You can always do another row, another layer if it messes up. And this time I didn't bend the leaf down. Sometimes I'll just push the leaf almost all the way down until I get past the top of it, and then I'll push it right back up and work my way around it. This time I just kind of left it at that 90-degree angle. It was a little harder to get around. And this is just a process of wrapping and squeezing just to set it into that hot glue. And I ran out, so that piece was not long enough. It does not hurt to cut more than you need. You will always use it up. So I cut some more, and I'm going to finish this off. And here I'm just pinching. I just pinch the very end off and let the hot glue do the rest. It will seal it nicely. And then I give the stem a little natural bend. And there is this completed flower. Enjoy. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe. I'd love to hear your comments. And I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks.